Ben always thought his life was fine. Sure, marriage had its ups and downs, but after 16 years with Laura, he'd learned to appreciate the balance they built. He worked long hours as an electrician, while she thrived in her career as a marketing manager. Their kids, Sophie and Lucas, kept them busy with soccer games, school plays, and endless debates over bedtime. Life was predictable, even comforting. That was until Laura started acting different. It began with little things like her sudden obsession with her phone. Laura had never been tech-savvy. Ben once joked she could lock herself out of a microwave if it had a touchscreen, but now she was glued to her device, texting, giggling, hiding the screen whenever he walked by. One night, as they lay in bed, Laura let out a loud, bubbly laugh while staring at her phone. Ben, half asleep, peeked over her shoulder. "What's so funny?" Laura's reaction was instant. She yanked the phone away like he'd tried to steal it. "Nothing," she snapped, slipping out of bed. "You don't need to know everything, Ben." That wasn't like her. Laura had always been open. Maybe too open sometimes, sharing random gossip about her coworkers or her elaborate plans to redecorate their already perfect living room. But now, secrets. The next day, while sipping his coffee, Ben replayed the scene in his head. Maybe she's planning a surprise for me, he thought, though deep down that didn't feel right. Laura didn't plan surprises. She was the kind of woman who handed him Christmas gifts in the bag they came in because wrapping paper was a waste of time. Then there was Daniel, her boss. Ben had met him a few times, tall, charming, with one of those two white smiles that seemed custom-ordered from a dentist with a side hustle in Instagram fame. Laura talked about Daniel a lot, too much maybe, how he was so thoughtful or how he really understands people. Once she'd said, "You should take notes from him, Ben, he knows how to treat his wife." That comment had stung, but Ben brushed it off. Marriage was hard, right? People vented. But as the weeks passed, more pieces of the puzzle started falling into place, and they all pointed to the same troubling conclusion. Laura wasn't just distant. She was someone else entirely. Ben wasn't the type to jump to conclusions. He liked to think of himself as level-headed, the kind of guy who needed evidence before making any big accusations. But Laura's behavior had gone from odd to downright suspicious. One Saturday evening, Laura claimed she had to work late on a project. Ben didn't think much of it. Marketing campaigns probably had tight deadlines, and she'd been swamped lately. But something nagged at him. The office wasn't far, so after dinner, he decided to drop by with coffee. Just a little surprise. A nice gesture. When he arrived, the building was dark. Not a single car in the lot, except for the janitor's old truck parked near the service entrance. Ben's gut twisted. He sat in his car for a few minutes, sipping the coffee he'd brought for her, convincing himself he'd misunderstood. Maybe she was at another location? Maybe she really was working, but left early? The sound of a text message snapped him out of his thoughts. Laura had sent a simple, "Don't wait up." No mention of where she was or why she wouldn't be home anytime soon. That night, Laura came back at 2 a.m. Ben was still awake, lying in the dark, staring at the ceiling. When she walked in, her face lit up with surprise. "Oh, you're still up?" she asked, her voice casual. Too casual. "Yeah," he said, sitting up. "Late night?" "Super busy," she replied, pulling off her heels and heading straight to the bathroom. Moments later, he heard the shower running. Ben sat on the edge of the bed, a million thoughts racing through his mind. Who comes home from work at 2 a.m. and immediately showers? He wanted to ask, but he could already hear her likely response. "You're being paranoid." Instead, he said nothing. Silence was safer for now. By Monday, Ben couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong. He decided to keep an eye out, not spying exactly, just being more observant. He started noticing patterns. Laura's work emergencies seemed to align perfectly with Daniel's schedule. Meetings, weekend projects, late-night phone calls. Daniel was always part of the equation. One evening, while scrolling through TV channels, Laura's phone buzzed on the coffee table. Ben glanced over, curious. The message preview was brief but strange. "Can't stop thinking about," before it disappeared as the screen dimmed. His heart pounded. He looked at Laura, who was busy folding laundry on the couch. You gonna get that? He asked casually. Oh, it's nothing important, she said quickly, stuffing her phone into her pocket. Ben's stomach churned. That wasn't nothing. And the way she avoided his eyes confirmed it. Something or someone was definitely important enough to hide. By the end of the week, Ben's suspicions had evolved into a quiet, seething certainty. The problem was he still had no concrete proof. He needed more than gut feelings and shady glances at Laura's phone. If he confronted her now, she'd brush him off, call him insecure, and find new ways to cover her tracks. No, if he wanted the truth, he had to be smarter. And maybe a little sneaky. That Friday, while Laura was out working late again, Ben called Claire. It was a risky move. After all, Daniel was her husband, and for all Ben knew, she might defend him. But Claire had always struck him as sharp and no-nonsense. If anyone could sniff out a lie, it was her. Ben was somewhat familiar with Claire. About 6 months ago, there was a corporate event. The employees came to it with their husbands and wives. Hi, Claire. This is Ben, Laura's husband. Ben started, his voice awkward. I know this is a bit out of the blue, but I need to talk to you about something, about Daniel and Laura. There was a pause, followed by a weary sigh. Let me guess. Claire said dryly, you think something's going on between them? Ben blinked, stunned. Wait, you already know? I didn't, she admitted. Not for sure, but I've had my doubts. The late nights, the business trips, the way Daniel suddenly started buying expensive cologne and working out like he's auditioning for a movie role. She paused. Why? What do you know? Ben hesitated. Nothing solid yet, just a lot of little things that don't add up. But if we work together, maybe we can figure it out. Claire didn't need convincing. Come over tomorrow, she said firmly. Let's compare notes. Ben arrived at Claire's house the next day. Claire waved him in, already clutching a folder stuffed with receipts, emails, and screenshots. She didn't waste time on pleasantries. Here, she said, spreading the papers across the dining table. This is what I've found so far. Ben scanned the documents, his jaw tightening. Hotel reservations, text messages, even a picture of Daniel and Laura at a restaurant. Definitely not a work meeting. That bastard didn't even try to hide it, Claire muttered, shaking her head. I knew something was off. But it's not just him, Ben said quietly, setting down a receipt for a luxury hotel. Laura's been lying to me, too. She told me she was working late last weekend, but the office was closed. Claire leaned back in her chair, arms crossed. So what's the plan? Confront them? Blow up their little fantasy world? Ben thought for a moment. Not yet. I want to catch them in the act, something they can't deny. Claire smirked. You're more patient than I am, but fine. Let's do this right. Over the next few weeks, Ben and Claire became an unlikely team. They exchanged texts, emails, and whispered phone calls, plotting their next move like amateur detectives. Claire managed to snag Daniel's schedule, which conveniently included a work retreat at a fancy hotel 2 hours away. Ben's blood boiled as he read the details. They're definitely going to meet there, Claire said, handing him the itinerary. I'll handle the legal side. Divorce papers, property filings. You just make sure Laura doesn't see this coming. Ben nodded, his face grim. Trust me, she won't. When the weekend arrived, Ben told Laura he was taking the kids to visit his parents. She didn't even blink, too busy packing her own bag for her retreat. As she kissed him goodbye at the door, Ben felt a strange mix of anger and relief. This was it, the moment he'd been dreading and waiting for. Before you find out what happens next, please subscribe to the channel. The hotel lobby was exactly what Ben had expected. Marble floors, polished brass fixtures, and a fountain that looked like it belonged in a cheesy romance movie. He stood near the check-in desk, arms crossed, trying not to look as nervous as he felt. Next to him, Claire was the picture of calm. Sipping a cappuccino like this was her regular Saturday morning routine. Are you sure about this? Claire asked, raising an eyebrow. You look like you're about to pass out. Ben shot her a glance. I'm fine. Let's just get this over with. The plan was simple, or as simple as it could be when confronting your cheating spouse. Claire had arranged for a sheriff to serve the divorce papers on site, while Ben waited to make his presence known. Daniel and Laura thought they were sneaking away for a weekend of secrecy. Instead, they were about to get the shock of their lives. A few minutes later, the sheriff arrived, a no-nonsense woman with a clipboard and an air of authority. "Room 405, she said briskly. "They're registered under his name." Ben's stomach twisted. Part of him wanted to run upstairs, kick down the door, and scream at both of them. But another part, the rational part, knew this needed to be handled cleanly. He couldn't afford to lose his temper, not when so much was at stake. "Let's do it," Ben said, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside. The elevator ride was painfully slow. Claire stayed behind in the lobby, giving Ben a supportive nod as the doors closed. The sheriff led the way, her boots clicking against the tiled floor as they walked down the hallway. When they reached the door to room 405, she knocked firmly. A muffled voice answered. "Who is it?" "Hotel management," the sheriff replied smoothly. "There's an issue with your reservation." A few seconds later, the door opened, and there stood Laura, wrapped in a plush white bathrobe, her hair damp from a shower. For a split second her face lit up with a smile, until she saw Ben. "Ben?" she stammered, clutching the robe tighter around her. What are you doing here?" The sheriff stepped forward, holding out the papers. "Laura Evans, you've been served." Laura's jaw dropped as she took the envelope. Her hands shook as she tore it open, her eyes darting across the first page. "What the hell is this?" she demanded, her voice rising. "Divorce? You're divorcing me?" Ben folded his arms. "What did you think was going to happen, Laura? That I'd just sit at home and wait while you and Daniel played house?" Her face turned red, a mix of panic and anger. "You don't understand. This isn't what it looks like." Ben let out a bitter laugh. "Oh, really? So you're not half naked in a hotel room with your boss?" Laura opened her mouth to respond, but the sound of footsteps behind her made her freeze. Daniel appeared in the doorway, equally disheveled, wearing a pair of sweatpants and nothing else. The color drained from his face when he saw Ben. This isn't what it looks like," Daniel mumbled, scratching the back of his neck. Ben raised an eyebrow. "You two need to work on your excuses." Laura tried to grab Ben's arm, her voice desperate. "Please, Ben, just let me explain." "No," Ben said sharply, pulling away. "You don't get to explain. You made your choices, Laura. Now you get to live with them." Before Laura could reply, another voice cut through the tension like a knife. "Oh, don't stop now. This is just getting good." Everyone turned to see Claire striding down the hallway, heels clicking against the tiled floor, a folder in hand, and a look on her face that screamed, "Don't mess with me." Daniel's jaw dropped. "Claire?" he stammered, instinctively stepping back like a cornered animal. "Hi, honey," Claire said sweetly, waving the folder. "You forgot to pack something important, these." She thrust the divorce papers into his chest with enough force to make him stumble. "Consider yourself served." "Wait, what?" "Claire, this isn't what you think." Daniel's voice cracked as he tried to regain some composure. Claire let out a sharp laugh. "Oh, please, do you really think I'm stupid? You've been prancing around with her?" She pointed a manicured finger at Laura, whose face was now as red as a stop sign, "while I've been at home holding everything together." Laura tried to interject, her voice barely above a whisper. "Claire, I don't," Claire snapped, spinning toward her. "You don't get to play the victim here. I'm not interested in hearing your excuses or your half-hearted apologies. I'm here for one reason and one reason only, to make sure both of you get exactly what you deserve." Ben leaned casually against the wall, arms crossed, watching the scene unfold with the faintest hint of a smirk. "You're enjoying this, aren't you?" he muttered to Claire. "Oh, you have no idea," she replied without missing a beat. Daniel's eyes darted between Claire and Laura, his face pale. "Can we talk about this privately?" Claire raised an eyebrow, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Oh sure, let's go have a private chat. Maybe we can book the room next door and call it a couple's retreat. How does that sound, Daniel?" The sheriff cleared her throat, stepping forward with the air of someone who had seen enough daytime soap operas for one day. "Ma'am, sir, I'll need you to sign these papers as acknowledgement of receipt. Let's keep this civil." "Civil?" Claire repeated, laughing as she handed Daniel a pen. You might want to define that for him, Sheriff. It's not exactly his strong suit. Ben couldn't help but chuckle under his breath. She's got a point. Laura's voice cracked as she turned back to Ben. Please, Ben, don't do this. We can fix this. I made a mistake, but I love you. Ben's expression hardened. You love me? Funny way of showing it, Laura. You've been lying to my face. I'm done. Claire, having finished her dramatic takedown of Daniel, turned to Ben and gave him a supportive pat on the shoulder. Come on, let's get out of here. These two deserve each other. As they walked back toward the elevator, Daniel called after them, his voice shrill with panic. Claire, wait. Don't go. We can... Oh, save it, Daniel, she shot back, pressing the elevator button. You're not talking your way out of this one. Enjoy your freedom. I hear it's lonely. When the elevator doors finally closed, Claire let out a deep breath and leaned against the wall, her confident facade slipping just a bit. Ben glanced at her and smirked. Feel better? A little, she admitted. But I'm going to need a drink. Or 5. Ben nodded. First round's on me. Claire grinned. Good. You owe me for putting up with your messy, dramatic life. Hey, you're the one who wanted to team up. Ben shot back, laughing as the elevator dinged and the doors opened. As they walked out of the hotel, leaving the chaos behind, Ben felt a strange sense of relief. The weight he'd been carrying for months was finally gone. For the first time in a long time, he could breathe. Ben and Claire found themselves sitting at a cozy corner of a dimly lit bar, the kind of place where the music was low and the drinks were strong. Claire swirled her gin and tonic thoughtfully while Ben nursed a whiskey neat. The weight of the day hung heavy in the air, but for the first time there was a spark of levity between them. Claire began breaking the silence. I wasn't expecting today to turn into an episode of Jerry Springer. Ben chuckled, shaking his head. You handled it like a pro. If I didn't know better, I'd think you'd done this before. She raised her glass in a mock toast. Divorce papers and drama? Oh, I'm a natural. But seriously, Ben, thanks for having my back. This whole thing, I don't think I could have done it alone. Ben clinked his glass against hers. Right back at you. I don't know what I'd have done without your fiery speeches. You're like a one-woman wrecking crew. Claire laughed. Hey, someone's got to keep the universe in balance. But you owe me big time. Next time you decide to blow up someone's secret affair, at least give me a heads up so I can wear my I told you so t-shirt. They both laughed, the tension finally easing. After a long pause, Ben leaned forward, his expression more serious. Let's make a deal, he said. We stick together through this. Whatever happens with the divorces, the custody stuff, we've got each other's backs. Claire nodded, holding out her hand. Deal. They shook on it, sealing their unspoken pact. The next morning, Ben found himself sitting in the living room, trying to mentally prepare for what he was about to do. Sophie and Lucas sat on the couch, their attention briefly torn away from their cartoons. Sophie, at 14, already had the sharp intuition of someone older. Lucas, 9, had a perpetually curious expression, as though every moment was a mystery waiting to be solved. Kids, I need to talk to you about something important, Ben began, his voice steady but soft. Sophie immediately turned off the TV, her brow furrowed. Is it about Mom? She asked, her tone cautious. Ben nodded. Yeah. Look, I want you to know that this doesn't change how much I love you both. And it's not your fault. But your mom and I are going to get a divorce. Lucas tilted his head, frowning. Is that like when Jimmy's parents stopped living together? He got 2 Christmases. Do we get 2 Christmases? Ben couldn't help but smile a little. Yes, buddy, you'll get 2 Christmases. But it's not just about that. Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes or choices that hurt each other, and we can't stay together the way we used to. Sophie's face tightened, her eyes glistening. It's because of Mom, isn't it? She said quietly. Ben hesitated, choosing his words carefully. Your mom made some choices that were hard for me to accept. But we both love you very much, and that will never change. Lucas's hand shot up like he was in class. Wait, does this mean you get to date again like on TV? Ben blinked, caught off guard. Sophie groaned, swatting Lucas on the arm. Seriously, Lucas? That's your question? What? Dad's handsome, Lucas said earnestly. He'll be fine. Ben let out a laugh despite himself. Thanks for the vote of confidence, buddy. But let's focus on you two right now, okay? Meanwhile, Laura wasn't ready to give up. She'd convinced herself that if she could just show Ben how much she cared, he'd forgive her. So she hatched a plan. A romantic dinner at home, complete with candles, flowers, and a roast chicken recipe she'd found online. It did not go as planned. Ben walked in that evening to the smell of smoke and the blaring sound of the fire alarm. The kitchen was a disaster: burnt chicken, spilled wine, and Laura frantically waving a dish towel at the smoke detector. What the hell is going on? Ben shouted over the noise. I was trying to make us dinner, Laura said sheepishly, her face streaked with sweat and flour. Ben stared at her, equal parts amused and incredulous. Laura, you've never cooked a day in your life. What made you think tonight was the time to start? I just wanted to do something nice, she said, looking down at the charred remains of the chicken. I thought it might help us. Ben sighed, grabbing a kitchen towel to help clean up. You can't fix this with dinner, Laura. It's not that simple. A few days later, Ben and Claire were at a coffee shop, going over some paperwork, when Daniel walked in. He spotted them immediately and hesitated before approaching their table. Mind if I join you? Daniel asked, his tone overly polite. Claire raised an eyebrow. That depends. Are you here to apologize, beg, or embarrass yourself? Daniel ignored the jab and pulled out a chair. Look, I know I messed up, he started, addressing both of them. But can we find a way to make this easier? The lawsuits, the custody stuff, it's all getting out of hand. Ben leaned back, crossing his arms. What exactly do you want, Daniel? I just think we should move past this, Daniel said, fumbling for the right words. Maybe we can work something out. Claire, you and I, we had good times. Doesn't that count for anything? Claire's expression darkened. Good times? Like when we caught you with Laura. Look, Daniel, you destroyed 2 families. Flustered, Daniel reached for his coffee cup, but knocked it over instead, spilling the contents all over his lap. He yelped, jumping up as the hot liquid soaked through his pants. Ben couldn't hold back a laugh. Well, that went about as well as I expected. Claire smirked, grabbing her bag. Come on, Ben, let's leave him to clean up his mess. Again. Despite Laura's desperate attempts to win Ben back and Daniel's bumbling efforts to placate Claire, the divorces moved forward like an unstoppable train. The court proceedings were anything but quiet. It was a battle of lawyers, testimonies, and thinly veiled insults. Yet, Ben and Claire had prepared meticulously, and their work paid off. Claire's sharp wit and thorough documentation left Daniel's legal team scrambling. By the end of it, she walked away with the house, a slice of Daniel's retirement savings. He always said I was terrible at budgeting, Claire quipped to Ben after the final hearing. Guess I'll have to find a way to spend all this money. Ben's own settlement was less dramatic, but satisfying. Nonetheless, he kept the house. The kid's stability was his top priority and agreed to joint custody with Laura. It wasn't perfect, but it was fair. And the kids seemed to adapt to the arrangement better than he'd hoped. A week after the final hearing, Ben and Claire found themselves back in the same dimly lit bar. This time, there was no paperwork, no scheming, just 2 people who had weathered the storm together. Claire raised her glass to freedom. Ben clinked his whiskey against her gin and tonic, and to sticking it to cheaters everywhere. They both laughed, a genuine sound that felt like a release. For the first time in months, Ben felt like he could breathe again. You know, Claire said, her tone teasing, we make a pretty good team. Maybe we should start a business, divorce consultants, specializing in revenge and paperwork. Ben chuckled. Tempting, but I think I've had enough drama for one lifetime. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the kind that didn't need to be filled. Then Claire leaned forward slightly, her expression softer. You know, Ben, through all this chaos, She hesitated, then smiled. I'm just glad we had each other. It would have been unbearable otherwise. Ben nodded, meeting her gaze. Same here. I don't think I could have done it without you. The moment lingered, charged with something unspoken, but not unwelcome. Claire broke the tension with a playful smirk. "Don't go falling in love with me, Ben. I'm a handful." Ben grinned. "I'll try to resist." They both laughed, the conversation drifting to lighter topics. But as they left the bar that evening, walking side by side into the crisp night air, Ben couldn't help but wonder if this was the start of something more. And for the first time in a long time, the idea didn't scare him. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to the channel. I wish you a great mood and good luck.